Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Art Validation and Verification Body Training. Today, we are going to cover a few different things. As you saw in the meeting invitation, we do have the expectation that you have reviewed TREES 2.0 and or watched the public webinar that goes through the requirements of TREES. So for this training, I am not going to focus on the actual detailed requirements of TREES per se, but I'm instead going to focus on the validation and verification standard requirements, including the requirements for accreditation and competencies of the validation and verification bodies, as well as the actual validation and verification process. There will be a short quiz after this that I will email to all participants. You must receive a 70% on your quiz in order to qualify as having passed the training, but it is 10 questions and multiple choice, so it should not take you very long. All right, I'd like to first note that the TREES 2.0 and the TREES validation and verification standard, which I usually abbreviate as TVVS, is available on the ART website, as are all of the VVB templates and the templates and guidance materials for TREES 2.0. TREES 2.0 validation and verification standard was approved by the ART board. And as I said, it is available on the website, and we will update it every 3 years or more often as needed. So validation and verification bodies must be accredited for ISO 1465 with ART included in its scope by an international accreditation forum member with whom ART has a memorandum of understanding. TREES focuses on national or large-scale subnational jurisdiction accounting. As a result, the requirements for validation and verification focus on data collection and reporting, as well as the underlying processes and management systems supporting these efforts. The VVB competency requirements reflect this difference from projects. We require the VVBs to have experience in third-party greenhouse gas verification of jurisdictional or national RED+ programs, or other large-scale multi-stakeholder project verifications. The members of the verification team that conducted these experiences, and preferably the lead verifiers, must still be full-time employees of the company. In addition, we require at least one team member have management system auditing or product certification auditing experience. Finally, we require that VVBs have access at all times to full-time personnel or contractors that are experienced in remote sensing, forestry, safeguards, and the potentially relevant languages. In order to be approved as an ART VVB, organizations must submit an application and an attestation. The ART Secretariat will review the application and may request additional information as appropriate. The ART Secretariat will then either provisionally approve, or reject the application. We will provide the decision and the reasons for the decision in writing to the VVB. A provisional approval will be granted if the VVB meets all the application requirements and the requirements outlined in 2.1.1 of the validation and verification standard. If the ART Secretariat provisionally approves the application, the VVB may then conduct one ART validation or verification to serve as its witness audit during the accreditation process with the IAF member. If the VVB successfully completes the accreditation process, its application will be fully accepted. If the VVB withdraws its application for accreditation under ART or fails to resolve major nonconformances identified during the accreditation process, its application will be rejected. A list of the provisionally approved and approved VVBs is maintained and available on the ART website. All lead verifiers must complete training on TREES and the validation and verification standard prior to beginning validation or verification activities. Additional VVB staff or verification team contractors may also attend the training, but are not required to do so. The training is not open to the public in order to promote discussions and questions. A representative from each approved VVB must also attend a quarterly meeting with the ART Secretariat. During these meetings, the Art Secretariat addresses questions and/or will provide clarifications to all VVBs to promote a consistent understanding of trees and implementation of validation and verification activities across the organizations. As appropriate, the Art Secretariat may host additional trainings or issue guidance to highlight changes to trees or new program requirements. In order to mitigate potential conflicts of interest, art participants must rotate VVBs after 3 consecutive verifications. Note that this is the number of verifications, not the number of years verified. A validation may be conducted in conjunction with one of the verifications, but does not count towards the verification count for rotation. After the 3rd verification, the art participant must retain a new VVB for at least 1 verification. The new VVB may not use a lead verifier from any of the 3 previous verifications, but may retain other members of previous audit teams, such as technical specialists. As part of their initial and ongoing accreditation process, VVBs will be monitored by their accreditation body through desk reviews, as well as field audits. Any nonconformances identified during an accreditation witness audit or ongoing surveillance or reassessment audits will be addressed through the accreditation body's audit process, and the Art Secretariat will follow any work restrictions or limitations imposed on a VVB by their accreditation body. The Art Secretariat will also monitor the performance of the VVBs approved under ART in order to ensure consistency between VVBs and to improve the program. As required in trees, the Art Secretariat will conduct completeness checks of all the validation and verification reports and associated documentation to ensure the VVBs followed the requirements outlined in trees and in the trees validation and verification standard. The Art Secretariat will also review finding resolutions to ensure correct interpretation of trees and consistency between VVBs. These reviews may result in outcomes such as the development of new guidance documents, updates to existing guidance documents, additional trainings, or potential issues being identified to VVBs. The Art Secretariat may also learn of potential issues through the public comment email available on the ART website. If the Art Secretariat identifies an issue with the VVB's performance, the action taken will be in line with the issue's level of severity. As you can see in the table taken from the validation and verification standard, the actions may range from corrective and preventative actions being taken by the VVB to suspension of the VVB's ability to issue validation and verification opinions. The validation and verification cycle is defined in both trees and the trees validation and verification standard. Validations must occur no later than after the 1st year of each 5-year crediting period. They may be done earlier than that and separated from the initial verification if the participant wishes to do so. Verification must occur after years 1, 3, and 5 of the crediting period. Verification can also occur after years 2 and 4 if the participant wishes to do so, as no credits will be issued without conducting a verification. If in the initial crediting period, a participant elects to use a crediting period start date up to 4 years prior to the year of the tree's concept submittal, the initial verification must cover all the years included in the initial monitoring report. So we'll now review the scope of the validation and verifications in more depth. So first, focusing on validation. The VVB will evaluate whether the reference period and the crediting period are correctly defined and in line with the requirements of trees. The VVB will also evaluate the spatial information provided on the accounting area and evaluate whether it is in line with the requirements for either national or subnational accounting areas, depending on the participant's assertion. The VVB will also review eligibility requirements. This may include the scale threshold if it's a subnational accounting area, national government approvals for subnational participants, and things like mandatory national reporting to the United Nations. The VVB also evaluates whether the ART participant has provided a description of its rights to the tree's credits or the plan to obtain rights. The VVB validates the completeness of the description, but does not validate the legality of the claims to the credits. So I'd like to clarify that a little bit because we do actually get a lot of questions on that. So the VVB absolutely does review the laws that are cited and any agreements or contracts provided to ensure that they really do support the participants' assertion of rights to the credits or to the benefits of the emissions reductions. The VVB does not, however, have to conduct an independent review of all laws that are within that country to determine if any other legal interpretations may exist. If any questions or disputes are raised by public stakeholders during the consultation period or arise during the audit, the Art Secretariat will engage appropriate legal counsel to assist in the review and the resolution of any concerns. The VVB also evaluates the information provided and whether projects or other programs listed by the art participant could or will generate emissions reduction or removals credits in some or all of the accounting area during the crediting period. The VVB also evaluates the procedure or plan provided by the art participants against the trees requirements to ensure a proper plan is in place for avoiding double issuance, double use, and double claiming of trees credits. Next, the VVB will evaluate whether the participant is eligible to use the selected crediting approach if they choose to use the removals or HFLD crediting approach. Then they evaluate for any of the three crediting approaches whether the data and parameters used to construct the initial crediting level meet the accounting requirements of trees and whether the initial crediting level itself has been calculated correctly. The VVB also evaluates whether the uncertainty calculation is performed correctly. A RED Plus implementation plan must be provided by the participants, and the VVB will ensure that it is included and that it identifies new and ongoing activities. The VVB is not responsible for validating whether they think it is a good RED Plus implementation plan or whether they think that the implementation plan will be largely successful. They simply evaluate whether it does include all the new and ongoing activities that the participant has identified. Next, for the validation, the VVB will evaluate whether the description of the monitoring plan in the trees registration document complies with the requirements of trees. This includes whether the processes and methods are sufficiently described and documented, and if they would allow for transparent and consistent monitoring of emissions over time and being compared ultimately with the crediting level. The VVB shall assess whether the processes and monitoring arrangements described are feasible and that the means of implementation, including data management and quality assurance and quality control procedures, are sufficient. To look at reversals, the VVB will evaluate whether the buffer contribution assessment tool has been correctly applied and if the information regarding mitigation factors is correct and complete. The VVB also evaluates whether the leakage assessment tool has been correctly applied and if its result is correct. Next, if the art participant has applied for variances, the VVB will evaluate whether they have been sufficiently documented and whether they received approval from the Art Secretariat. Next, the VVB will look at whether the art participants' approach and plan for calculating emission reductions and removals is correct, including whether they are applying reversal and leakage deductions as appropriate. The VVB will evaluate whether the art participants' response to any stakeholder comments submitted during the consultation process have been addressed and properly responded to. So as a reminder, stakeholder comments can be submitted directly to the VVB, gathered during the audit, or submitted through the art website at red@winrock.org following the public posting of comments in the art registry, or the documents in the art registry. Last but not least, the VVB will also evaluate the environmental, social, and governance safeguards indicators as follows. So for the structure indicators, the VVB evaluates the description provided in the trees registration document to determine whether the relevant governance arrangements are in place and evaluates whether those can ensure that the implementation of RED Plus actions will be in conformance with the indicator. For the process indicator, the VVB evaluates whether the description provided in the registration document regarding the relevant institutional mandates, processes, procedures, and/or other mechanisms are in place and enforced, and the VVB evaluates whether these can reasonably be ensuring that the implementation of RED+ actions will be in conformance with the indicator. Outcome indicators might be evaluated in two different ways. For the first 5 years after the participant joins ART, the VVB evaluates the outcome indicator descriptions to ensure that the ART participant defines the desired specific outcomes for that theme and presents an initial plan for collecting monitoring information within 5 years of the participant joining or sooner. If they already have outcome monitoring in place, the VVB would evaluate whether the plan presented would meet the requirements of the indicator. After the first 5 years, the VVB validates the description to ensure that the ART participant is defining the specific outcomes wanted, including any justified adjustments since previous crediting periods, and that they present a plan for ongoing collection of monitoring information to demonstrate improvements in achieving these outcomes over time. So switching to verification, the verification scope is largely similar, but focuses on the results claimed and whether anything has changed. So I'll be brief on a lot of these, but you'll see a lot of similarity. So for eligibility, the VVB has to verify that the ART participant continues to be in conformance with all of the eligibility criteria. The VVB also verifies that they have used the correct crediting period and reporting period as outlined in the trees registration document. The VVB verifies that the spatial information on the accounting area is consistent with the previous information provided and that nothing has changed there. They also verify that the ART participant has provided a description of its rights to the credits or its plan to obtain rights to the credits and notes any changes since the last submission. This is important because we do recognize that it may take time for governments to conduct all the negotiations and ensure all the ownership agreements are in place. So we do anticipate that the portion of credits that a participant may be able to issue might change over time. So this will be something the VVB will check carefully each time a monitoring report is submitted. For participation in other programs, the VVB ensures that the ART participant has listed all RED+ crediting or payment for performance programs or projects within the proposed area, regardless of credit ownership, and notes any changes since the last trees documents have been submitted. The VVB then verifies that the ART participant has implemented the plan or procedure to avoid double counting correctly. And they verify that the summary of RED+ activity implementation is included. The VVB also verifies that the reported emissions reductions for the period are included, looking at whether the monitoring plan has been implemented as outlined in the registration document, and whether data and parameters used to construct the annual emissions total meet all the accounting requirements of trees. The VVB verifies whether the buffer pool contribution assessment tool is applied correctly and buffer pool contributions are accounted for in the final estimates. They also verify whether the leakage assessment tool was applied correctly in the final calculation. Similarly, they ensure that all variances from trees have been documented by the participant and received approval from the ART Secretariat and have been implemented correctly. The VVB then verifies whether the ART participant's calculation of the emission reductions and removals, if quantified, over the reporting period is correct, including evaluating that reversal deductions, leakage deductions, uncertainty deductions, or any other required adjustments are appropriately included. The VVB must also ensure that emissions reductions using the HFLD crediting approach and using the removals crediting approach are clearly identified to ensure proper labeling in the ART registry. The VVB next evaluates whether resolutions to any outstanding minor nonconformances from the previous verification have been fully implemented. Similar to the validation process, the VVB also evaluates the participants' response to any stakeholder comments received regarding the trees monitoring report. And for the environmental, social, and governance safeguard, the VVB evaluates the indicators as follows. So for the structure indicators, they evaluate whether the evidence provided demonstrates that the governance arrangements were in place, ensuring the implementation of RED+ actions were in conformance with the indicator. For the process, they evaluate whether the evidence provided demonstrates that the relevant institutional mandates, processes, procedures, and/or mechanisms were in place and enforced. And for the outcome indicators, similar to validation, if it's within the first 5 years, the VVB evaluates whether the evidence demonstrates that they have an initial plan for developing a monitoring of outcomes, and or demonstrates that the ART participant has concluded development of its outcome monitoring plan. In all subsequent years, the participant must demonstrate that the monitoring plan has been implemented and is gathering relevant data. So now that we've identified what the VVBs are going to look at, let's cover what you will need to do as your actual process. So ART participants directly solicit bids from and select any approved or provisionally approved ART VVB using their own solicitation and selection processes. The list of approved VVBs is maintained on the ART website, along with the contact information for each organization. The ART Secretariat does not participate in the selection of VVBs or the contracting process, and we also do not negotiate terms or fees. This is up to the participant and the VVB to negotiate directly. Once selected, an ART-approved VVB must execute a participant-specific TRIZ validation and verification conflict of interest form for each validation or verification. This form is available on the ART website and must be submitted through the ART registry. The ART Secretariat reviews the form to ensure that potential conflicts of interest have been identified and that mitigations proposed are appropriate. The ART Secretariat may request additional information or revisions if needed prior to approving the document. The ART Secretariat must approve the document prior to the VVB beginning any work on the validation or verification. I'll discuss the actual audit process in more detail on the next slides. Then the Secretariat reviews the document's findings and resolutions as I described previously. And finally, the ART board receives a full package of the TRIZ documents, the validation and verification, opinions and reports, and reviews them. The board may request additional information if it desires, and ultimately will approve or deny the credit issuance for the participant. So the audit process very closely follows the ISO defined processes. So the VVB must hold a kickoff meeting with the ART participant prior to the work beginning. At a minimum, the kickoff meeting shall include a review of the scope of the audit team, the audit process, the definition of materiality, the types of nonconformances, and their potential impact on the audit and the outcomes. Next, the VVB will develop a validation or verification plan, including sampling requirements in line with their own internal risk assessment and sampling plan development processes, taking into account the relative contribution of each source, internal or external audits of the data, and other factors affecting risk levels. TRIZ does not require specific data sampling or field work because of the large variability of the activities and data sources that might be included. The VVB shall implement the validation or verification plan following the appropriate audit trails. The audit shall consist of both desk review and on-site components. An on-site kickoff meeting shall be conducted, which at a minimum provides a schedule and an overview of the anticipated audit activities. An on-site audit closing meeting shall be conducted at the conclusion of the on-site audit activities. Findings shall be categorized according to the structure I will discuss on the next slide. When appropriate, multiple related findings arising from the same system or process may be grouped for the ART participant to address. The VVB shall review and either approve or reject resolution to audit findings proposed or implemented by the ART participant based on the type of finding. This may be and likely will be an iterative process whereby the VVB reviews resolutions multiple times. The review may include requests for additional evidence, clarification requests, submission of revised documentation, and/or an additional site visit. Prior to the final issuance of a validation report and/or a verification report and opinion, the draft documents and list of findings shall be reviewed by an independent internal reviewer. The purpose of the internal review is to ensure that the validation and/or verification activities are completed in accordance with trees and that all findings identified during the course of the validation and/or verification have been resolved. The VVB shall then submit the trees validation report, including the validation opinion, following completion of the validation, and a trees verification report and opinion to the Secretariat following completion of the verification. Reports and verification opinions shall follow the latest templates available on the ART website. ART requires the application of a positive or negative opinion. No deviations are allowed without the prior approval of ART. The VVB shall conduct a closing meeting with the ART participant, which concludes the validation or verification process. So types of findings. The first type of finding we allow is a major nonconformance. So this is defined as a nonconformance that has a material impact on the emissions reductions and removals claimed by the ART participant. Trees defines materiality is 1% of the ERRs. A major nonconformance also may be a systems issue that could result in a material impact on the ERRs in the future, or a systemic issue that affects the ART participants' ability to conform with the requirements of trees, including eligibility or safeguards requirements. A major nonconformance must be resolved prior to a positive verification opinion being issued by the VVB. All major nonconformances and resolutions must be listed in the validation or verification report. The second type of finding is a minor nonconformance. This is defined as a nonconformance that does not have a material impact on the ERRs claimed, or does not represent a systemic failure that would lead to nonconformance with the requirements of trees, including eligibility and/or safeguards requirements. So for example, an example of a minor safeguards nonconformance would be a nonconformance with the written procedure or process cited by the ART participant, where the ART participant has implemented safeguards actions or processes that meet the requirements of trees, but are not as written in their documentation. This would be categorized as a minor nonconformance. The ART participant must propose a plan for resolving minor nonconformances that includes allocated resources and a timeline. Minor nonconformances do not need to be fully resolved prior to the VVB issuing a positive validation or verification opinion, as long as the VVB approves the plan for resolution. All minor nonconformances and resolutions or planned resolutions have to be listed in the validation or verification report. Planned resolutions must be reviewed during the next verification to ensure completion. If the ART participant is unable to either close the minor nonconformance in the agreed upon timeframe or provide a satisfactory explanation regarding the delay, the minor nonconformance must be elevated to a major nonconformance. All of this being said, calculation errors or other similarly easily resolved minor nonconformances should be resolved prior to the validation or verification opinion being issued. An observation is an issue identified by the audit team that does not have objective evidence to constitute a nonconformance, but may lead to one in the future. Our participants may respond to these issues or may choose not to respond. All observations must be listed in the validation or verification report, however. Finally, clarification requests. These are questions used by the audit team to identify and track open issues and requests for information from the participant. Clarification requests do not indicate nonconformances, but may lead to one depending on subsequent information provided. These may be optionally used by a VVB to provide transparency in the audit trail and improve communication between the VVB and the ART participant. As such, they will not be included in the publicly available validation or verification report. The ART Secretariat reserves the right to ask to see the list of clarification responses, however. So validation and verification documents. All VVB validation and verification reports and verification opinions shall be publicly available through the ART participants' account on the ART registry. Portions of the report may be redacted in the publicly available information if the report references commercially sensitive information identified by the ART participant in either the trees registration document or the trees monitoring report, and if the VVB has confirmed it is actually sensitive information. VVB shall retain all records relating to the trees validation and verifications for a minimum of 10 years after the conclusion of the relevant reporting period. So finally, I'd like to highlight a few important points that really just have not fit on any of the other slides. So the first one is the required level of assurance. Under trees, the required level of assurance is a reasonable level of assurance. Also, if an ART participant terminates a validation or verification after the services have begun, but before the VVB is able to reach an opinion, the VVB shall inform the ART Secretariat in writing of the status of the validation and verification and the reasons why the validation or verification has been aborted. No trees credits will be invalidated once issued. If an error is found in a previous validation or verification, which necessitates either an increase or a decrease in emissions reductions or removals, the adjustment required shall be made to the total emissions reductions or removals in the reporting period being verified when the error was discovered. If the emissions reductions or removals in the current reporting period are insufficient to address the error, the remaining adjustment necessary shall carry over to the next reporting period and so on until the error has been fully compensated for. For complaints and appeals, the ART participant shall utilize the complaint and appeals procedure of the VVB for any issues regarding the performance of the VVB or their activities during the audit. For any issues relating to the requirements of trees or ARTs or the governance of our program, the ART participant shall utilize the procedure outlined in section 16 of trees. As outlined in trees, the validation and verification must be completed within 12 months of the project kickoff. Extensions must be requested and approved in writing if justification for needing additional time can be warranted. So this concludes our training for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at red@winrock.org. As I mentioned previously, I will send a brief quiz to each of the participants, and if you could please return them, I would appreciate it. You must receive a 70% in order to pass the training. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.